My name is Steve, and you're watching the Life and Sad Ending channel. And today we're going to talk about half of one of the most famous comic teams in movie history and radio. And that would be Bud Abbott from Abbott and Costello. And you'll notice that I used his name first because back in those days, the straight man always had the top billing in a comedy team. They were more of a commodity than the person who did the jokes and got the laughs, strangely enough, because as odd as it may seem, that's actually the hardest part of the job. Even with Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, it was Martin and Lewis. Bud was born in Reading, Pennsylvania on October 2nd, 1897. Now, I know in some places they have it that he was born in Asbury Park, New Jersey. His dad's name was Harry Abbott, and his mother was Ray. And they had worked at the Barnum and Bailey Circus for a time. Some of Bud's biography information said he worked on a steamer ship shoveling coal for a time. I don't know if that's really true. Some of these stories get kind of made up as the years go on. But Bud did work at the Casino Theater. It's like a burlesque house in Brooklyn. In these theaters back in those days, this was before television, they would have these vaudeville acts, and they'd be all manner of dog acts, comedy acts, singers, dancers. And Bud would get hooked up with this act or the other or do his own thing, but eventually he ran into Lou Costello, and they formed the famous Abbott and Costello. This was in the mid to late 30s, and of course radio was king back then. So Abbott and Costello started being pretty popular on radio, particularly on the Kate Smith show. And back in those days, the money was split 60-40 to the straight man, in this case, with Bud Abbott receiving more money. Bud Abbott was married, and him and his wife adopted two children, Bud Jr. and Vicky. Eventually, the popularity of Abbott and Costello on the radio led to them being signed by Universal Pictures. They made movies there for about 20 years. The first one they were in was Buck Privates in 1941. And in the 1945 film, Naughty 90s, they did their famous Who's on First Bit. And you know, they actually show that clip on a loop at the Baseball Hall of Fame. My personal favorite Abbott and Costello movie, and I've said it many times, is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, because it has everything. It has movie monsters, it has Abbott and Costello, and of course, nobody did the scared thing. Well, maybe Don Knotts did it pretty good, but Lou Costello did the scared thing just about as good as anybody. Abbott and Costello did end up having a TV show for a time, and it was pretty popular. Their box office movie receipts started to drop, though, in the 50s. And I think Lou got tired of the fact that Abbott made more money than him, and he was somewhat bitter about it after a time, and they didn't always get along so well. And Abbott and Costello finally broke up in 1957. And sadly, in 1959, Lou Costello died of a heart attack. He was only 52 years old. You know, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello both had problems with the tax man, but it's sort of ironic because they had spent so much time touring and promoting war bonds during World War II. It's kind of a shame that they ended up in the hole so deep with the government, but you got to pay the man, right? At one point, Bud Abbott owed the government $750,000, so he ended up having to sell his house. And Bud and his wife eventually even had to sell her jewelry to satisfy the payment. Bud Abbott once said in an interview that if he had $1 for everyone who ever saw one of his movies, that he wouldn't have a problem. Later, then, some people started sending him money. After Lou Costello's death, Bud needed to work because he had to have money, and he suffered from epilepsy, and he was a drinker too, as everyone was then, it seems. And so he tried to reform a sort of a comedy act with the comedian Candy Candido. And I'm not that familiar with him. Maybe you could leave a comment down below about who he was. Bud had a lot of health problems, and at one point he broke his hip, and the National Enquirer did a story about it. And people did send money to help him out, and they also sent a lot of get well cards. And he was very happy about that. But at those times, he was barely getting by on his Social Security, which wasn't that much. I think it was less than $200 a month at that time. His wife worked part-time, I believe. Sadly, after suffering from prostate cancer and having 2 strokes, Bud Abbott did die at his home in Woodland Hills, California, on April 24th, 1974. He was only 76 years old. What was your favorite Abbott and Costello movie? Leave it in the comments down below. Hit that like button and think about subscribing. I sure would appreciate it. And I'll see you next time, unless I come to my own sad ending.